this woman's ultimate sacrifice to make me a mom. It was the best day of my life, and probably the worst of hers. Finally, she asked the nurse to help her to get rid of these people and go with another agency. Did she know another agency? The nurse would call the agency that I happened to be hooked up with. They came, they brought profiles, hundreds. I don't know why she picked us, but she did. They met her where she was in her addiction. They would ultimately get her more treatment after the delivery. I made an anonymous donation to my nonprofit agency with the promise that 100% of the monies would go directly to her treatment only. You're not supposed to do that, but I did. Max was born 6 weeks early, weighing in at about 4 pounds. This tiny preemie baby was positive for cocaine, THC, and hepatitis C. I'm going to take my braces out. I meant to do that before. Sorry. The doctors explained that he was not an addicted baby. He was just urine positive. His birth mother worked really hard on her sobriety during the pregnancy. In about a week, my newborn baby's urine tested negative for all substances. And at 6 months old, he had shed his birth mother's hepatitis C antibodies and was clear of everything. At 13 weeks old, I put Max in daycare and went back to work. The first day, I got halfway down I-35, headed for downtown Dallas to my job, and the car just turned around on its own. No way could I leave this precious baby with the big green eyes. I quit my job and would be a stay-at-home mom for the next 15 years. I had a baby girl 2 years after the adoption. It happens. Max was the easiest baby, the most polite and kind kid. He was smart, artistic, and showed signs of being musically talented at a very early age. He was popular and had tons of friends and girlfriends. He had everything he needed. He was so adored and the favorite of all 4 grandparents. His sister didn't like that very much. Even with all that, I believe he struggled with abandonment issues that adoptees often have. Looking back, he seemed troubled at times. I found out much later that he felt as though he didn't fit in, even though no one saw it that way. He was very sensitive to teasing from other kids, even in high school. Very much a follower, not a leader. Later, he blamed me, of course. But that's okay. I blame my mother for all my issues, too. As Max grew older, we would talk about his adoption. In 2020, I remember a conversation where he wanted all the details and pictures of his birth parents. He had never asked for this before. We had an open adoption, but, he knew. He just didn't seem interested. He must, I think he probably had visited that in treatment or therapy, and so he wanted to know more about that. He said, "Mama, can you imagine if my birth mother would have raised me?" My response was, "You probably wouldn't have had the opportunities you've had." I explained how brave and courageous his birth mother was and how she wanted so much for him to be with 2 stable parents who could provide for him. So much so that she put his life before her own. Junior year of high school, Max quit the football program. He had been playing since age 5. He quit his guitar lessons. He was a great guitar player. He was hanging out with friends who drank, smoked pot, and he ditched the jock clique for the stoner clique. His dad and I were divorced by then, which he also blamed me for. And he didn't have as much structure living with his dad. I asked him to move back in with me. And I barely got him graduated. His friends could smoke pot, drink a little, and not overdo it. Max couldn't do that. He wanted more for longer, which got him into trouble, not to mention legal trouble. he would ask me, why can't I be like my friends and just go home? Why can't I be normal? He didn't finish his associate degree program and continued to spiral down. The substance use got more serious. He had been in a sober living facility from which he was released for not working the program. Our rules were, you will complete treatment or you're not coming home. The hardest thing in the world is to watch your child self-destruct. Waiting for the other shoe to drop, or panicking every time the phone rang. I was making myself physically ill. I was close to a breakdown. Living on constant high alert, my only skills were anxiety and worry. I couldn't concentrate, I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, my hair was falling out. I was a bitch to everyone. I was so worried. Max's disease was running my life, all our lives. I didn't know where he was at times. I didn't know if he was hungry or cold. I'm not sure how I made it through that, but all I could do is love him from a distance, and worrying myself sick would not change the outcome. Addiction truly is a family disease. I started Al-Anon and was working on my own recovery. I realized if I couldn't fix Max, I had to fix me. A constant reel was playing over in my head. He knows where I am. He knows my phone number. And I was just waiting. I told him 1,000 times I would do anything to save his life, but I wouldn't work harder on his life than he was working. Through my own recovery, I realized I owed him the dignity to fail or get better. He needed to experience the natural consequences of his life. I prayed the consequences would make a difference and maybe he would get to rock bottom. Soon I found out rock bottom was overrating, and Max's rock bottom had a basement. Max was in and out of about 3 treatment facilities, detox, treatment, relapse. But we kept going and he kept trying. He tried so hard. Max would have long stints of hard drug sobriety. I say that because I don't believe he ever had true substance-free sobriety until he came to Greenhouse. This is why I'm honored to be here. When he was released from Greenhouse in June 2022, he was different. I could hear recovery in the way that he talked. He was really walking the walk. He seemed to have pride in his sobriety. He was more mature and had finally put down the bat for a feather. We wanted to build on this recovery, so I got him a psychiatrist that specialized in addiction and a therapist at UT Southwestern. We wanted to keep going. I continued my recovery and continued working the steps in Al-Anon, as was his Nana, the queen of enabling. She'd always bail him out. It was all working great until it wasn't. Max started working for an insurance broker and wanted to get his insurance license. He liked having a desk job. He did very well there and was liked by everyone and did a good job. Max would eventually have lunch with the owner's son. We'll call him Kyle. He was warned by his co-workers not to hang out with Kyle and that he was a piece of shit and an addict. Relapse happened that day at that lunch. Kyle offered Max a perk. It was just a pain pill, right? No big deal. We all know it wasn't a Percocet. As did Kyle. Max knew him. They went to high school together, but they weren't, they knew of each other, but they weren't really in the same friend clique. Which kind of pisses me off. Like, his mother, his parents were on this big insurance agency and had private planes and all. Like, why was he even up there? I'm not going to preach about fentanyl today. You all know it's poison. And you know it's just a matter of time before it kills you or you're laying in a hospital bed on life support. When Max told me about this lunch, I knew that was a defining day in his young life, in all our lives. A life I prayed would not be cut short. But I was listening to the news and researching, and you all know. I tried and tried to make him understand he was playing Russian roulette every time he used. He knew the dangers, but he hated it. He hated it. He knew the dangers, but was in so deep of the addiction that he didn't care. In the throes of Max's fentanyl addiction, I don't know how many pills he was ingesting daily, but I do know it was a lot. He avoided me like the plague. It was a cycle I was all too familiar with. His life became unmanageable and he was spiraling out of control, and more legal trouble came his way. A year ago, January 2023, Max was stopped for a traffic violation. There was a prescription bottle of Suboxone in the back seat, along with a box of Narcan, which prompted a search of the truck. 148 M30s. He and his user friend Grace purchased 300 blues, split them, and he smoked 2. Neither of them sold nor distributed drugs. Max described Grace as a junkie with a trust fund. Max was working commercial construction at the time for his friend's dad, and some of his friends worked there too. They knew something was wrong, but they couldn't quite put their finger on it. They had no idea of his addiction and how bad. So he didn't sell or distribute, neither did Grace. He always worked out of town, and he just needed that many to feed his habit. And after all, buy in bulk, they're $4 a piece. You buy them separate, they're $30. Straight to jail. His bail was only $10,000 for the second-degree felony charge. The detective told me he knew he wasn't selling. His truck was full of construction tools, hard hats, dirty work boots. It only took $1,000 to bail him out, but I left him in there, and I threatened all his friends, do not get him out. They had no idea how bad it was. Neither did his boss. They sensed something was wrong, but they just couldn't figure it out. Max always kept a job. He always had a vehicle. He was well-groomed, and he always looked nice. The functioning fentanyl addict. Max would detox in Denton County Jail. I want to tell this other story about detox. A couple of years ago, while we were waiting to get him admitted into a detox facility, I got to see my kid the sickest I'd ever seen him. For me, that was the scariest thing I ever witnessed. He was so sick. I couldn't do anything to take the pain away. While we were sitting in the lobby, his phone was blowing up. Apparently, he owed his plug some money, and this guy was threatening to come up to detox and blow his mother's head off if she didn't pay him. He told Max he knew where I lived and that he would rape me at gunpoint and slit my throat from ear to ear. In the freaked out mental state Max was in, because he was so sick, he couldn't see the scare tactic and was worried about me leaving. I responded to the guy's text as Max. I gave him the address and where we were and told him his mother would meet him outside with the money. I was just kind of pissed off at the whole situation, just kind of taking it out on him. But he better be careful, the place was crawling with security. I knew he was a young, pimply-faced addict in skinny jeans that wouldn't risk getting high or going to jail. Max couldn't see it. The silly manipulation continued. Max was back in intake, and I was just sitting there with his phone, upset, distraught. I responded as me. He just kept on. I responded as me this time and told him he would not get any money from me. He was a dumbass for giving free drugs to an addict and just charge it to the gang. Not another word. But I did sleep with a .380 under my pillow and a shotgun by my nightstand. Okay, now back. That was my little side detox story. So Max is in jail. He was mad at me for not bailing him out and not letting his friends bail him out. This is the first time he had ever disrespected me in his 24 years of life. I'd never seen this erratic, angry behavior from him. He was manipulating me and all his friends. But I wore the big black hat because I knew if he was breathing, there was still hope. I needed to get his head straight. I kept the lines of communication open and continued to love him no matter what he said to me. I knew it was the disease talking and not Max. Every time I got that call from jail, I asked the Lord to step in, stop what he was doing, and jump on this call. They were bad. I didn't even recognize it. 1 month passed. Oh, he kept calling, and I picked up every time and just took it. Just kept telling myself, it's just that it's not him. I took every call. One month passed, 2 months passed, and every time we talked, he became more and more clear, calm with each call. He was doing everything he could to get better while being locked up. He was going to AA meetings, substance abuse workbooks. He would show me on the video thing, everything he was doing. His friends no longer would answer his calls out of fear of me. His dad and Nana wouldn't answer because it was just too painful. All he had was me, the person he was mad at most. The anger subsided. He began to engage. He was polite, funny, and sweet, and hungry in jail. He would send me long messages about he was remorseful and so sorry he'd messed up his life and messed up our lives. We didn't deserve it. He seemed intelligent suddenly. He continued to ask, why can't I just be normal? Why do I have to fight this hard? He would send me a long, beautiful note on Valentine's Day and just express himself. And he was just so smart and calm and not under any influences. I wasn't stupid. I know when you're in jail, you have a clarity you wouldn't normally have. But it was a start, and I loved it. It was time to go to work on the future. Max was released on a PR bond, but was facing very serious charges with the harshest of penalties of all the drug charges. As horrible as it would be, I was okay with him being locked up because he would be alive. He asked me to go to treatment immediately when he was released from county jail. He knew I was his biggest cheerleader if he was working towards recovery. I picked him up from county and we called Greenhouse. Well, first we went and got a haircut in Chick-fil-A. Sitting in the drive-thru, while Max was eating his spicy chicken sandwich and waffle fries, we called Greenhouse. He was asked when he used last. It had been 90 days. I soon found out how hard it would be to get someone in treatment sober. Just doesn't work like that with insurance or anything. I just wanted to build on this and just more time and more time and more time because he was so positive. He felt so good. Resolutions was recommended. He loved it. He loved it here. I've been told he did very well, was even a process group leader. By all accounts, he was doing great and was released. I had my son back. He was playing guitar and he was always fishing and he was spending time with me, just cooking and family time. He was present. He wanted to be around us. We loved it. I continued to drug test Max because he lived with me. Always clean as a whistle. I tested him on June 13th. Clean. I went to San Diego the next day, just on a trip. The next morning at the hotel at 5 a.m., my phone rang. It was Louisville homicide. I began to panic and hyperventilate. The detective said they were investigating a murder at my house, and they think it's my son. I screamed, I'm like, murder? What? My boyfriend grabbed the phone, and I began to throw up. I could hear the homicide detective talking to him on the phone. He wanted to confirm my daughter and I weren't in the house hurt or dead. There were blood drops all over the front door, blood on the porch, front porch, inside his truck, blood on the sidewalk leading to his truck. The detective wanted my camera footage. The camera showed him violently throwing up, aspirating blood, very disoriented as he was trying to enter the code on the front door to get in. It wasn't murder. It was overdose. Homicide turned the case over to the narcotics division. The digital footprint, the phone, explained everything. He had purchased 2 pills, drove home, ingested 1.5 in the truck. He couldn't get in the house, but made it back to the truck. Texted someone to ask if they wanted the other half that was left. No response from that person, and he ingested the remaining half, and he stopped breathing. My neighbor Dave, who I see at the gym every morning at 5:30, drove up on him. He said, I thought he was working on his stereo or something because he was hanging half out and half in the truck. Both doors were wide open. He said it looked like foul play. Like it didn't look, there was blood everywhere. It didn't look like a murder. Just a side note, the man that sold him the fentanyl sits in jail today and was indicted last month on charges of manufacturing and delivery causing death. This was a month before the law came into effect that you can be charged with murder. But fortunately, the grand jury knows that. Along with an indictment on other indictments on unrelated gun charges and other charges. He says a long rap sheet. He's also an addict, big-time dealer in our area, and a felon. That could have been Max sitting in jail if the user friend had taken him up on his offer, and he used that last half of the remaining pill, and stopped breathing. I think about that. The experts may not agree with me, but in my opinion, fentanyl robbed Max of his sobriety. You can overdose on any substance, but I believe if he was in recovery for any other substance, he would have had a fighting chance. There's no chances with fentanyl. Death is your choice unless you're lucky enough to be thrown in jail, like Max was. The autopsy came. That's frightening. The toxicology. Cause of death was fentanyl toxicity. You probably know this, but 0.02 nanograms is a lethal dose. Max had 0.31 post-mortem after death. Those blue perks were pure fentanyl. You know that when you're clean and you use again, especially with fentanyl, it magnifies the dosage, especially if you try to do what you were doing before you were clean. So many people die for that reason. They don't start out slow. They just take up where they left off. On my bad grief days, I blame myself. I had Narcan, but wasn't